They laughed at her across the Christmas table, but none of them knew she was hiding a truth that would shatter everything. Maya Bennett was 32 years old, and every Christmas felt like walking into the same carefully staged performance where she already knew her role. The quiet daughter, the dependable one, the one who arrived early, helped in the kitchen, and smiled just enough to keep the peace without ever becoming the center of attention. That night, the house smelled like roasted turkey cinnamon and artificial warmth, but beneath it all was something colder, something familiar. It started subtly, like it always did. A joke here, a comment there, laughter that wasn't meant to include her, but instead circle around her like a spotlight she never asked for. Her father leaned back in his chair, glass in hand, and with a tone that sounded casual but cut deeper than it should, he brought up the one thing Maya had learned to expect every holiday: her relationship status. 32, still single, he said, as if announcing a failure rather than a fact. The table responded with soft chuckles, some uncomfortable, some entertained. Her sister Brooke smirked, adding her own polished cruelty disguised as humor, while their mother watched with that familiar expression of quiet agreement. Maya kept her eyes on her plate, cutting her food into smaller pieces than necessary, as if control over something small could make up for the lack of control over moments like this. She had heard it all before. Every variation of the same message: you are not enough, not chosen, not wanted in the way that matters. And yet, what hurt the most was not the words themselves, but how normal they had become. No one stopped it. No one defended her. Because in this family, this was not an attack. It was tradition. The dependable daughter would endure, and the evening would continue. But something inside Maya had started to shift long before that dinner. Years of quiet endurance had built into something heavier, something that no longer fit neatly behind polite smiles and lowered eyes. She had spent so long being the version of herself they expected that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to protect something truly hers. That night, as the laughter settled and the conversation moved on, Maya realized she was standing at a quiet turning point. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. For the first time in years, she was not thinking about how to survive the dinner. She was thinking about what it would mean to stop playing the role entirely. And though no one at that table could see it yet, the woman they believed they understood was already gone. One sentence from her mother was all it took, and everything Maya had buried for years finally reached its breaking point. The moment Maya's mother placed her glass down and said, "Some people end up alone for a reason," the room didn't react with shock. It reacted with recognition. That was the most painful part. No one gasped, no one objected, no one rushed to soften the blow. Instead, the table fell into a quiet that felt rehearsed, as if everyone had been waiting for that exact line to be spoken. Maya felt it land, not like a sudden strike, but like something heavy and familiar settling onto her chest. It wasn't new. None of this was new. The judgment, the subtle humiliation disguised as concern, the way her life was always turned into a topic for discussion, rather than something to be respected. She had spent years swallowing these moments, telling herself it wasn't worth the fight, that keeping the peace was more important than defending her truth. But that night, something shifted in a way she couldn't ignore. She looked around the table, really looked this time, and saw not just her family, but a pattern. Her father waiting for her reaction like it was part of the entertainment. Her sister barely hiding a smile, comfortable in a role that had always placed her above. Her mother calm and composed, as if she had just stated an undeniable fact, rather than delivered a quiet cruelty. And everyone else silent witnesses, who had chosen comfort over courage. For years, Maya had played her part perfectly. She had laughed when expected, stayed quiet when necessary, and made herself smaller, so the room could stay peaceful. But peace built on silence was never real peace. It was just absence of resistance. And in that moment, Maya realized she was tired of disappearing for the sake of others. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, not because they were powerful, but because they were final. They carried the weight of everything her family had ever implied about her. That she was difficult, unlovable, too much in the wrong ways, and not enough in the right ones. That if she was alone, it must be her fault. Maya felt her hands still on the table, her fork resting untouched. She didn't rush to respond. That was new. The old version of her would have laughed it off, made a joke, deflected the tension so everyone else could stay comfortable. But the woman sitting there now didn't feel the need to protect the room anymore. She felt the need to protect herself. And that difference changed everything. She lifted her gaze, slowly meeting her mother's eyes without flinching. The silence stretched, but this time it wasn't waiting for her to shrink. It was waiting for her to speak. And for the first time in years, Maya understood something clearly. If she stayed quiet again, nothing would ever change. Not how they saw her, not how they treated her, not how she felt walking into rooms like this. So she made a decision. Not loud, not dramatic, but irreversible. She would not carry their version of her life anymore. She would not let their assumptions define her reality. And she would not let another holiday pass where she was the only one expected to endure. What happened next didn't begin with anger. It began with truth. A truth she had protected, hidden and guarded for years. Not because she was ashamed of it, but because she knew exactly what this room did to things that mattered to her. But now, looking at the faces around the table, she realized something even more important. The truth wasn't fragile, it was powerful. And for once, she was ready to let it be seen. Maya didn't slam her hand on the table. She didn't cry, and she didn't try to defend herself the way she had so many times before. Instead, she did something far more unsettling. She smiled. Not a wide smile, not a nervous one, just a small controlled expression that made her mother pause for a fraction of a second. It was the kind of smile that didn't ask for approval and didn't try to soften the moment. It simply existed calm and steady, like a signal that something had shifted. Then she set her fork down with deliberate care, the soft clink against the plate, cutting through the tension more sharply than any raised voice could have. The room held its breath without realizing it. Maya lifted her eyes, not scanning the table like she used to, not searching for someone to rescue her or change the subject. She looked directly ahead, grounded, certain. "I'm not alone," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It reached every corner of the room because it wasn't trying to fight the noise. It replaced it. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. It wasn't the polite silence of a conversation ending. It was the kind of silence that demanded an explanation. Her father blinked first, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion. Her sister's smile froze, caught between disbelief and irritation. Her mother's face tightened, as if recalculating something that no longer made sense. Maya didn't rush to fill the space. For once she let them sit in it. She let them feel the uncertainty she had lived with for years. Then she spoke again, just as calmly as before. "I've been married for years." The words didn't explode, they landed. And when they did, everything in the room changed. Chairs shifted. Glasses trembled slightly in hands that had suddenly forgotten how to stay steady. Her father's reaction came fast and loud, his chair scraping back as he stood halfway up, as if volume could restore control over a moment he no longer understood. "Married," he demanded the word, sounding less like a question and more like an accusation. "To who? Not congratulations. Not are you happy." Just disbelief wrapped in authority. Maya noticed that. She noticed everything now in a way she hadn't before. The priorities, the patterns, the reflex to challenge instead of support. And instead of shrinking under it, she stayed exactly where she was. "I said I'm married." She repeated, her tone unchanged, not defensive, not apologetic. That steadiness unsettled them more than any argument could have, because they were used to controlling the narrative, to shaping her reactions, to predicting exactly how she would respond. But this version of Maya didn't follow the script. She wasn't explaining herself. She wasn't asking for permission. She was stating a fact. A truth that existed whether they accepted it or not. Her mother leaned forward slightly, her voice lower, now sharper. "Why didn't you tell us?" There it was. The shift from judgment to ownership. Not concern for her happiness, but confusion about why they hadn't been included. Maya felt the question settle in the air, and for a brief moment, she remembered all the times she had wanted to share something good, only to hesitate, to second-guess, to protect it from becoming another topic of critique. That memory passed quickly. She didn't need to revisit it. She already understood it. And so instead of justifying herself, She held her ground in the simplest way possible. She didn't answer immediately. She let the silence stretch again, this time heavier, more uncomfortable. Because the truth she was about to reveal wasn't just about her marriage. It was about everything that had led her to keep it hidden. And deep down, even before she said another word, they already knew. Something in the room had shifted beyond repair. The version of Maya they had always known, the one who absorbed their words and adjusted herself accordingly, was gone. In her place was someone who no longer needed their approval to define her life. And that realization was far more shocking than the fact that she was married. The silence after Maya revealed she was married didn't stay empty for long. It shifted, twisted, and then filled with something far more uncomfortable than disbelief, recognition waiting to happen. At first, her family clung to confusion, searching her face for any sign that this was a joke, an exaggeration, or some desperate attempt to reclaim dignity. But Maya didn't give them anything to hold on to. She sat there calm, steady, completely certain, in a way that made doubt impossible. Her father was the first to break, demanding a name, as if that alone could restore order. And when Maya finally said it, Ethan Cole, the air in the room changed again. This time it wasn't just shock, it was memory colliding with reality. Her father froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for it to be noticed. Her sister's eyes narrowed, searching, calculating. Her mother blinked as if trying to place something she should have already known, because they had heard that name before, not in the way it should have been heard. Not with meaning. Not with attention. But in passing, in fragments. In moments they had never bothered to fully see. Ethan Cole wasn't a stranger. That was the problem. He was someone her father had once praised at a charity event, calling him impressive, capable, a young man with a future. He was someone who had stood in their own kitchen, polite and composed, waiting for Maya after a dinner where she had barely been acknowledged. He was someone Brooke had flirted with openly, confidently, assuming any man near Maya was unclaimed territory. And through all those moments, not one of them had stopped to ask the most important question: who was he to Maya? That realization didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, painfully, like a truth, pushing its way through layers of denial. Maya watched it happen in real time. She saw the shift in her father's posture, the tightening in her mother's expression, the subtle panic creeping into her sister's eyes. Because this wasn't just about a hidden marriage anymore. It was about what that secrecy revealed. It exposed how little attention they had ever paid to her life, how easily they had dismissed anything connected to her as unimportant, secondary, or temporary. They had met the man she loved, they had spoken to him, evaluated him, even admired him. And yet they had never once considered that he could be hers. That thought alone carried more weight than any accusation Maya could have made. Her father tried to regain control, his voice sharper now, more defensive than before. He repeated the name as if saying it out loud could somehow change its meaning. But it didn't. The truth remained exactly where Maya had placed it, undeniable, immovable. Her mother's reaction came differently, quieter, but just as revealing. There was something unsettled in her eyes, not just shock, but something closer to discomfort, as if she had suddenly realized that someone outside the family had seen them clearly, that someone had chosen Maya anyway. That part mattered more than they wanted to admit, because if a man like Ethan Cole, someone her father respected, someone her family had considered worthy, had chosen Maya, then everything they believed about her had to be questioned. And that was far more threatening than the marriage itself. Brooke's reaction was the most immediate, her disbelief quickly turning into irritation, then something sharper, something edged with wounded pride, because she remembered him too. She remembered the way she had assumed his attention, the way she had acted as if any interest he showed would naturally shift toward her. And now, standing in that moment, she had to confront the possibility that he had never seen her that way at all, that he had always been looking at Maya. That realization cut deeper than she was prepared for. Maya didn't rush to explain any of it. She didn't need to. The truth was already doing the work for her. It was filling the room, reshaping every memory, every interaction, every assumption they had ever made. And for the first time, her family wasn't reacting to the version of her they had created. They were facing the reality they had ignored. Not because it was hidden, but because they had never thought it was worth seeing. Maya knew words alone would never be enough for this room. Not with a family that had spent years twisting her reality, questioning her choices, and reshaping every truth into something easier for them to dismiss. So she didn't rush to defend herself, and she didn't try to convince them. Instead, she reached slowly into her purse and pulled out a small cream envelope she had carried with her all evening. That simple motion changed the energy in the room instantly. Because this wasn't just another claim. This was something solid, something that could not be interrupted, mocked, or rewritten mid-sentence. She placed the envelope gently on the table beside her plate, her fingers resting on it for a brief moment, as if grounding herself in what she was about to reveal. No one moved. Not her father. Not her mother. Not even Brooke. For the first time that night, they weren't preparing a response. They were waiting, and that difference mattered. Maya opened the envelope with calm precision, the soft sound of paper unfolding, cutting through the silence. She didn't speak right away. She let the moment breathe, let the tension build into something undeniable. Then she took out the first item, a photograph. She placed it in the center of the table where everyone could see. It wasn't extravagant. No grand ballroom, no elaborate decorations, no crowd of relatives smiling for the camera. Just a simple courthouse garden, gray sky above, soft light, and her standing there, beside Ethan, her grandmother, close to her side. It was quiet, intimate, real. And that was exactly why it felt so powerful. Brooke leaned forward first, her expression shifting as recognition hit. Her father followed, picking up the photograph with hands that were no longer steady. His eyes scanned the image, lingering on Ethan, on Maya, on the undeniable closeness between them. This wasn't staged. This wasn't imagined. It was real. Maya watched their reactions without interrupting. She didn't need to narrate what they were seeing. The truth was already visible. Then she reached back into the envelope and pulled out the second document, the marriage certificate. She placed it beside the photograph, aligning it carefully, as if giving it the respect it had never received in this house. Her mother's breath caught slightly, the weight of it sinking in deeper now. This was no longer something they could question. It had a date, signatures, legal recognition. It had permanence. And finally, Maya took out the last item, a folded letter. The moment her mother saw the handwriting, her expression changed in a way that couldn't be hidden. Recognition came fast, followed by something closer to fear. Because that handwriting belonged to someone they all knew, someone they couldn't easily dismiss or overpower. Maya didn't unfold it immediately. She let it rest in her hands, giving the room time to understand what it meant. This wasn't just about proving she was married. It was about revealing why they hadn't been part of it. Why she had chosen to protect something sacred from the very people who should have celebrated it. The envelope wasn't just evidence. It was a boundary made visible. It held everything she had, kept safe. Her love, her decision, and the one person in her family who had truly seen her. And as the silence deepened, Maya realized something important. For the first time, she wasn't the one being questioned. They were. Not out loud, not yet, but in every glance, every hesitation, every memory, being forced to rearrange itself around the truth laid out in front of them. She had spent years being asked to explain her life. Now she had given them something they couldn't argue with, something that didn't need her to justify it. And in that moment, Maya understood that truth doesn't need to be loud, to be powerful. Sometimes, all it takes is placing it on the table and letting it speak for itself. When Maya finally unfolded her grandmother's letter, the room didn't feel like a dining room anymore. It felt like a courtroom where silence wasn't comfort, but tension, waiting to break. She didn't rush the words. She let each line land exactly as it was written, unsoftened, unfiltered, impossible to reinterpret. If Maya is reading this at a family table, she began, her voice steady, then someone has mocked her for being alone. No one interrupted. No one denied it. Because they couldn't. The truth had already happened minutes earlier, and now it was being repeated back to them in a voice they couldn't dismiss. Maya continued reading, and with every sentence, the carefully constructed image of their family began to crack. Her grandmother didn't accuse loudly, didn't exaggerate, didn't dramatize. That was what made it devastating. She described patterns, quiet ones, consistent ones, the kind that build over years until they become normal. She wrote about how Maya's privacy had always been mistaken for emptiness, how her silence had been interpreted as weakness instead of restraint. She named the difference in how the family treated the two daughters. Brooke was sensitive when she hurt others. Maya was difficult when she spoke honestly. Brooke was celebrated for needing attention. Maya was criticized for needing respect. The words didn't attack, they revealed, and that made them impossible to argue with. Maya didn't need to look up to know what was happening around the table. She could feel it. The shifting weight of discomfort, the subtle movements of people who didn't know where to place their hands, their eyes, their thoughts. Her aunt, lowering her gaze. Her uncle going still. Brooke sitting back, no longer performing confidence, just absorbing something she had never been forced to face before. And her parents? Silent, not defensive, not dismissive, just quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar. Because for once they weren't in control of the narrative. The letter continued, and with it came the most painful truth of all, that Maya hadn't hidden her life out of shame, but out of protection. Her grandmother wrote about watching Maya learn slowly and painfully, that sharing joy in that family often meant watching it be reduced, compared, or taken apart, that it was safer to keep something beautiful away than to risk seeing it turned into something small. That line didn't just describe Maya's choices, it explained them. And explanations are dangerous when they remove the ability to blame. Maya's voice didn't shake as she read, but something inside her shifted with every word, not because she was hearing it for the first time, but because it was the first time it had been spoken out loud in a room that needed to hear it. The letter didn't ask for apology. It didn't demand change. It simply told the truth and left it there undeniable and complete. When Maya reached the end, she didn't add anything. She didn't explain. She didn't defend. She simply lowered the paper slightly, letting the silence return. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was heavier, realer. It carried the weight of recognition, of memory, of things that could no longer be ignored. And for the first time, Maya wasn't the one holding that weight alone. The room was holding it with her. The weight of the letter still hung in the air when the sound came from the front of the house. It wasn't loud, just the soft shift of a door, opening, a trace of cold air, slipping into a room that had grown too heavy to breathe in. No one spoke at first. For a second, it felt like the house itself had paused. Then footsteps followed, steady, unhurried, not trying to announce themselves but impossible to ignore. Maya didn't turn immediately. She didn't need to. Something inside her already knew. The tension at the table shifted again, but this time it wasn't confusion or denial. It was anticipation, sharp and uncertain. When Ethan stepped into the dining room, he didn't rush, didn't scan the room like he needed to understand it. His eyes went straight to Maya. Not her father, not her mother, not Brooke, just her. That alone changed the balance of the room. Because for the first time that night, someone had entered who wasn't reacting to the family's version of her. He was responding to the real one. "You ready to go home?" he asked. His voice was calm, steady, almost quiet, but it carried more authority than any raised voice that had come before it. Maya felt the words land differently than everything else that had been said that night. Not as pressure, not as expectation, as choice, and that was something her family had rarely given her. Her father straightened instinctively, stepping forward as if he could reassert control simply by occupying space. "You married my daughter, and never thought to speak to me," he demanded. Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step back either. "I asked Maya what she wanted," he said. The answer was simple, but it cut deeper than any argument could have. Because it exposed something. No one at that table had ever prioritized her choice. Her mother tried to recover next, her tone shifting quickly into something warmer, more controlled. "Ethan." "What a surprise," she said, as if politeness could erase everything that had already happened. Ethan acknowledged her with a nod, nothing more, keeping the distance intact, in a way that was respectful but unmistakable. Brooke crossed her arms, her voice sharper now, edged, with something she couldn't fully hide. "Convenient timing," she said. "You show up right when she needs backup." Ethan turned to her, then his expression unchanged, calm in a way that made his words land even harder. "You tried to ask me out while your sister was standing there," he said. The room went still again, but this silence felt different. It wasn't waiting. It was absorbing. Brooke's face flushed instantly, her confidence cracking, in a way no one had seen before. Her father glanced at her, confused, unsettled. Her mother's composure slipped for a fraction of a second. And Maya? She just watched. Because this wasn't something she needed to defend anymore. Ethan had said it plainly, without anger, without performance. Just truth. And truth, when spoken calmly, doesn't need volume to be powerful. Ethan stepped closer, then not rushing, not claiming space, just positioning himself beside Maya, as if that was the most natural place in the world. He didn't reach for her immediately. He gave her the space to choose, and when she finally placed her hand in his, it wasn't a reaction, it was a decision, one that didn't ask for permission, didn't seek approval, didn't need to be explained. Her father noticed it. So did everyone else. That quiet, simple gesture said more than anything Maya could have argued, because it showed what her life looked like outside of that room. Not smaller, not lacking, but steady, respected, and real. And for the first time that night, the power in the room didn't belong to the loudest voice. It belonged to the calmest truth. The room was already unsteady when Maya reached for the final document, but nothing had prepared them for what came next. The photograph had shaken them. The letter had exposed them. But this would bind the truth to consequences. She unfolded the typed page slowly, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if she understood the weight of what she was about to place in front of them. Her father noticed the legal letterhead first. That was enough to change his expression from anger to something sharper, more cautious, because anger was easy for him. Anger was control. But legal words didn't bend so easily. "What is that?" he asked, his voice lower now, stripped of its earlier certainty. Maya didn't answer right away. She let the question hang, just like she had let every assumption about her hang for years without correction. Then she began to read. The language was precise, formal, impossible to twist. It stated clearly that any attempt by her parents or Brooke to shame, pressure, or punish Maya over her private marriage would result in immediate consequences tied to her grandmother's estate. The words didn't shout. They didn't accuse. They simply defined a boundary and attached a cost to crossing it. That was what made them powerful. Her mother's breath caught softly, the meaning settling in faster than she wanted it to. Her father stiffened, the idea of losing control over not just the situation, but something material, something measurable, cutting deeper than the emotional truths ever had. Because feelings could be argued, money could not. "This is ridiculous," he said, but the force behind his words was already weakening. Maya continued reading, not raising her voice, not pausing for reaction. She knew better now. The truth didn't need permission to be heard. It needed to be finished. The document clarified that Maya's decision to keep her marriage private was not deception, but justified privacy, based on documented family behavior. That single word, documented, shifted everything again. It meant proof. It meant history recorded, not imagined. It meant the narrative her family had always controlled was no longer theirs to rewrite. Her mother spoke next, quieter than before, almost unsure. Documented by who? Maya didn't hesitate this time. Grandma. The answer landed with finality, because they all knew what that meant. It meant every careless comment, every dismissive remark, every moment that had seemed small at the time, had been seen, remembered, and preserved by someone who had understood their impact. Brooke let out a short, disbelieving laugh, trying to deflect what she couldn't control. "So what, she paid you for getting married?" Maya shook her head, once calm. "No, she protected me from being punished for it." That distinction mattered. It reframed everything. This wasn't about reward, it was about defense. Ethan spoke then quietly, but his voice carried the same steady weight it always had. "That's why it matters," he said. And in that moment the room shifted one final time, because the conversation was no longer about whether Maya had done something wrong. It was about whether her family could face what they had done right in front of them, with consequences attached. Maya folded the document back carefully and placed it on the table beside the others. She didn't push it toward them. She didn't force them to take it. She simply left it there, visible, undeniable, waiting, because the truth had already been spoken. And now, for the first time, it had something her family could not ignore weight. The room was still processing the weight of everything Maya had revealed when she did something no one expected. She didn't argue further. She didn't push the documents toward them or demand a response. Instead, she stood up quietly. That alone drew every eye in the room. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was different. For so long, Maya had been the one who stayed seated, who absorbed, who adjusted herself to keep the moment from breaking. But now she moved with intention. She turned away from the table and walked toward the side of the room where the extra chair had been placed earlier. The same chair her mother had removed before dinner with a casual remark that there was no need for it. That small action had gone almost unnoticed at the time. It had been subtle easy to dismiss just another quiet assumption that Maya would arrive alone as she always had. But now, under the light of everything that had been revealed, that empty space carried meaning. Maya reached for the chair and unfolded it herself. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. The soft sound of the legs locking into place echoed more loudly than it should have, cutting through the silence, like a statement no one could interrupt. Ethan stepped forward slightly, instinctively offering to help, but Maya shook her head gently. "I've got it," she said, her voice calm, steady. And she did. Because this moment wasn't about needing support. It was about claiming space. She carried the chair back to the table, each step measured, deliberate, as if she was rewriting something that had been decided for her long ago. No one spoke, they just watched. Her father, her mother Brooke, all of them witnessing something they had never truly allowed before. Maya placed the chair beside her own and adjusted it until it fit perfectly into the table. Not as an addition, not as an afterthought, but as something that had always belonged there. Then she walked into the kitchen. The movement was simple, almost ordinary, but it carried a quiet power. She took a clean plate from the cabinet, a fork, a knife, a glass, and one of the cloth napkins her mother reserved for special occasions. When she returned, the room felt even stiller, if that was possible. She set each item down, carefully completing the place setting, with the same attention she had given everything else that night. Plate, fork, knife, glass, napkin. A full place at the table. Not symbolic, not temporary, real. Ethan sat down beside her without hesitation, not making a show of it, not seeking acknowledgement. He simply took the seat, as if it had always been his. And in that quiet action, something shifted again. Because for the first time, the space Maya had always been denied was no longer something she was asking for. It was something she had created. Her father remained standing for a moment longer than necessary, his expression caught between disbelief and something harder to define. Her mother stared at the newly set place, her composure slipping in small, almost invisible ways. Brooke looked down, no longer able to perform the confidence she had relied on before. And Maya, she sat back down, beside Ethan, her posture relaxed, her presence steady. She didn't look at them for approval. She didn't wait for a reaction. Because this wasn't about convincing them anymore. It was about showing them. Showing them that her life was not empty, that her choices were not mistakes, that the space they had once decided she didn't deserve was hers to claim. And she had done it without raising her voice, without asking permission, without waiting to be invited. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do isn't to argue. It's to quietly take back what was always meant to be theirs. When the dinner finally began to fall apart, it didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic explosion, no shouting match that cleared the air. Instead, it unraveled quietly, piece by piece, revealing the truth of each person in ways words never could. Maya noticed it first in the small things. Her uncle, who had stayed silent for most of the night, approached her in the hallway with a softness that hadn't been there before. His apology wasn't loud or elaborate, but it was real, and that alone made it different from everything else she had heard growing up. Her aunt followed, helping clear the table. Without making eye contact, her movements careful, almost thoughtful, as if she was trying to process something she had ignored for years. Brooke's reaction was more complicated. She didn't apologize immediately. Instead, she withdrew her confidence, fading into something quieter, less certain. It wasn't transformation, not yet, but it was the first crack in a role she had always played without question. Later, her message would come short, direct, and unexpectedly honest. Not perfect, not complete, but real enough to matter. Maya's mother took longer. That night she said very little, her silence heavier than any argument she could have made. But weeks later, in a letter of her own, something shifted. It wasn't a full apology, not the kind that erased the past, but it held a recognition that had never existed before. She admitted in her own way that what Maya had protected wasn't distance, but peace. That realization didn't fix everything, but it opened something that had been closed for a very long time. Her father, however, remained unchanged in the moment. He stood by the door as they left, holding on to the same belief he had always carried, that he should have been told that he had been wronged. But even in that, there was a difference. This time he had no answer. When Maya told him the truth, that he should have been someone she felt safe telling. That silence, his lack of response, said more than any argument could have. Because for the first time, the weight of the situation wasn't on Maya to explain or justify. It rested with them. And as the night ended, it became clear that the truth hadn't just revealed her life. It had revealed theirs. The story didn't end with reconciliation, and that was what made it real. Maya didn't wake up to a perfect family, didn't receive sudden apologies that erased years of quiet damage. Instead, she chose something far more difficult and far more honest: distance. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. She understood now that love without respect isn't love, and access to her life was no longer something her family could assume. The following Christmas looked nothing like the one she had left behind. There was no long table filled with tension, no forced laughter hiding old patterns. Instead, there was a smaller table in a home she shared with Ethan, set with intention, not obligation. A few guests sat around it, people who didn't need to be convinced to treat her with kindness. There was warmth there, but it wasn't manufactured. It was real, built from choice, rather than expectation. Maya noticed the difference immediately. No one questioned her. No one turned her life into a topic. No one waited for her to shrink. And in that space, something inside her finally relaxed. Her parents didn't come that year. Her mother sent flowers, a quiet gesture that carried more meaning than words she wasn't ready to say. Her father sent nothing, and for once that absence didn't feel like rejection. It felt like truth. Brooks sent a card, simple, with one line that lingered longer than she expected. "I hope your table feels kind." Maya read it twice before setting it down. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was something closer to understanding than anything that had come before, and that was enough for now. Because Maya no longer needed everything to be fixed in order to move forward. She didn't need her family to become different overnight, to validate her choices. She had already built something that stood on its own, something steady, something respectful, something real. As the evening unfolded, Maya found herself looking at the empty chair she had placed at the table, not out of longing, not out of hope that someone would fill it, but out of quiet appreciation for what it represented. In her home, an empty chair didn't mean someone was missing. It meant there was always space for the right people. That was the difference. That was the lesson. Love wasn't about who had the loudest voice or the longest history. It was about who showed up with respect, who stayed with intention, and who never asked her to become smaller, just to belong. And for the first time in her life, Maya understood something clearly. She wasn't alone. She had never been. She had just been surrounded by people who didn't know how to see her.